Attraction rarely disappears suddenly. It doesn't vanish in a single moment or because of one misstep. It erodes gradually, quietly, through a series of small behaviors that, individually, seem insignificant but cumulatively shift how a woman perceives you. And here's what most men over 45 don't realize. When a younger woman loses attraction to an older man, it's almost never because of his age. Not directly. Age, by itself, is neutral. What matters is how that age is carried, whether it's embodied with confidence and presence, or whether it's overshadowed by insecurity, overcompensation, and the quiet collapse of masculine gravity. Because younger women, especially those who are genuinely drawn to older men, are not looking for youth disguised as maturity. They're looking for the real thing, for steadiness, for self-possession. For a man who has done enough internal work that he no longer needs external validation to feel secure. But when that steadiness falters, when an older man begins behaving in ways that signal doubt, urgency, or instability, the dynamic shifts. Not because she suddenly noticed his age, but because the qualities she was initially drawn to have been quietly undermined by behaviors that communicate the opposite of what maturity should represent. Today, we're going to walk through 7 of the most common mistakes older men make that cause younger women to lose attraction. Not to shame anyone, not to create anxiety, but to bring clarity to patterns that, once recognized, can be corrected. Because the truth is this: you don't lose attraction because you're older. You lose it because you've stopped being grounded. Let's begin. Before we look at the specific mistakes, we need to address the most pervasive myth about age gap attraction, the belief that younger women are automatically repelled by older men, and that any relationship with a significant age difference is inherently fragile. That's simply not true. Younger women who are attracted to older men are not settling, they're not confused, and they're not drawn to age itself. They're drawn to what age often represents: emotional regulation, life experience, self-knowledge, and the kind of grounded presence that younger men, still figuring themselves out, rarely possess. But here's the critical point. Those qualities are not guaranteed by age. They're earned through internal development. And when an older man hasn't done that work, when he's still insecure, still reactive, still performing rather than embodying, his age becomes a liability instead of an asset. Because now, instead of offering the stability that younger women seek, he's offering instability with the added complexity of a generational gap. And that combination is what drives attraction away. So the question is not, will she lose interest because I'm older? The question is, am I behaving in ways that undermine the very qualities that made my maturity attractive in the first place? And that's what we're about to explore. If this resonates, subscribe to Femme Psychology with Emma. We explore attraction with clarity, not noise. Mistake. 1. Overcompensating with money or status. When an older man feels insecure about the age gap, one of the most common responses is to lean heavily on external markers of value: expensive dinners, lavish gifts, trips, designer items. The unspoken message is, I may be older, but I can provide things a younger man cannot. And while generosity is fine, overcompensation is not. Because overcompensation signals insecurity. It tells her that you don't believe your presence alone is enough, that you're trying to buy her attention rather than earn it through who you are. Here's the psychological impact. When a woman senses that a man is using money to secure her interest, it shifts the dynamic from attraction to transaction. She may accept the gifts. She may enjoy the experiences, but the emotional foundation weakens because the relationship starts to feel conditional, as if his value is tied to what he can give rather than who he is. Let me give you a realistic scenario. A man in his early 60s starts dating a woman in her 30s. Early on, he takes her to upscale restaurants, buys her jewelry, and offers to cover expenses she didn't ask him to cover. On the surface, it seems generous. But beneath it, there's an unspoken anxiety. If I don't do this, Will she stay interested? She feels that anxiety. And instead of feeling cared for, she feels like she's being managed, like he's trying to ensure her loyalty through material means because he doesn't trust that his character alone is compelling enough. And that lack of trust in himself erodes her trust in him. The corrective behavior is simple. Be generous when it's natural, not when it's compensatory. Give because you want to, not because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. And trust that your presence, calm, grounded, self-assured, is valuable enough on its own. Because a woman who is genuinely attracted to you doesn't need to be bought. She needs to feel that you're secure enough not to try. Mistake 2. Constantly talking about your age. This shows up in several ways. Self-deprecating jokes about being old. Defensive remarks like, "I know I'm older," but overemphasizing the age gap as if it's something that needs to be acknowledged and managed at all times. And while this might seem like humility or self-awareness, it's actually the opposite. It's insecurity disguised as humor. And insecurity, no matter how it's packaged, is unattractive. Here's why this is so damaging. When you constantly bring up your age, you're doing two things. First, you're reinforcing the idea that age is a problem that needs to be addressed. Second, you're seeking reassurance. You're subtly asking her to validate that the age gap doesn't bother her, and that need for reassurance shifts the power dynamic. Because now, instead of leading the relationship with confidence, you're asking her to lead it by managing your insecurity. A realistic example. You're having dinner together. The conversation is flowing naturally. Then you make a comment like, "I'm probably too old to understand what that means." Or, "You should be with someone younger who can keep up with you." You think you're being self-aware, but what she hears is doubt, and doubt is contagious. If you're uncertain about your value, she starts to question it too. The corrective approach is to simply stop referencing it. Don't make jokes about your age, don't apologize for it, don't bring it up unless it's genuinely relevant to the conversation. Treat it as the non-issue it should be. Because the moment you stop treating age as a problem, it stops being one. Confidence isn't about denying reality, it's about being unbothered by it. Mistake 3. Trying too hard to appear younger. This might look like using slang you don't naturally use. Following trends you have no genuine interest in. Dressing in ways that feel performative rather than authentic. The underlying belief is that if you can seem younger, the age gap will feel less significant. But the opposite happens, because inauthenticity is far more repellent than age. Here's the psychology. Younger women who are attracted to older men are attracted to maturity, to the qualities that come with having lived longer, thought deeper, and moved beyond the need to perform. When an older man tries to act younger, he's rejecting the very thing that made him attractive in the first place. And worse, he's signaling that he doesn't trust his own value, that he believes youth is superior, and that he needs to mimic it to be desirable. A realistic scenario. A man in his 50s starts using phrases he heard on social media because he thinks it will make him seem relatable to a woman in her 30s. He changes the way he dresses to match current trends, even though it doesn't feel natural. He references things he has no real connection to just to seem culturally current. She notices. And what she sees is not a man who's youthful. She sees a man who's uncomfortable being himself. The corrective is straightforward. Be who you are. Dress in ways that feel authentic. Speak naturally. Engage with culture in ways that genuinely interest you, not in ways designed to prove you're still with it. Because authenticity is magnetic. And performance, no matter how well executed, always feels hollow. Mistake 4. Over-explaining or seeking approval. This often shows up as excessive talking, justifying why you chose a particular restaurant, explaining your career history unprompted, offering lengthy defenses of your lifestyle or choices before anyone has questioned them. And while this might feel like transparency or openness, it's actually a form of insecurity. It signals that you're not comfortable with your own authority, that you need her to validate your choices before you can fully stand behind them. Here's the psychological impact. When a man over-explains, it creates the impression that he's seeking permission. And permission-seeking is the opposite of leadership. Women are not drawn to men who need constant reassurance that their decisions are correct. They're drawn to men who make decisions calmly and move forward without needing external validation. A realistic example: you suggest going to a particular restaurant. Instead of simply making the reservation, you spend 10 minutes explaining why you chose it, listing alternatives you considered, and asking repeatedly if she's sure she's okay with the choice. What you're communicating beneath the words is uncertainty. And uncertainty erodes confidence. The corrective is to trust your decisions, make them calmly, state them clearly, and move forward without needing her to affirm that you made the right choice. If she has a preference, she'll express it. But leading doesn't mean steamrolling. It means being comfortable with your own direction. Confidence isn't loud, it's quiet, and it doesn't need to justify itself. Mistake 5. Emotional reactivity or jealousy. This might show up as monitoring who she talks to, becoming visibly tense when she interacts with men closer to her age, making passive-aggressive comments about younger guys, overanalyzing her behavior for signs that she's comparing you unfavorably. And while a degree of awareness is natural, reactivity is not, because reactivity signals that you're not secure in your own value, that you see younger men as threats rather than irrelevant to the dynamic you've built. Here's the psychology. Jealousy is rooted in scarcity thinking. It's the belief that your value is contingent on the absence of competition. But mature masculine presence is rooted in abundance, in the quiet certainty that you offer something distinct and valuable that has nothing to do with anyone else. When you react to perceived threats, you collapse that certainty. You signal that your confidence is fragile, and fragility is unattractive. A realistic scenario: you're at a social event together. She's talking to a younger man, laughing, engaged. You become tense. You insert yourself into the conversation. Later, you make a comment like, "Seems like you two had a lot to talk about." What you intended as casual observation lands as insecurity, and she feels it. The corrective is simple. Trust the connection you've built. Don't monitor her interactions. Don't compete for attention. Stay grounded in your own presence and let her move freely. Because a woman who is genuinely attracted to you doesn't need to be policed. And your calm non-reactivity is far more attractive than any amount of territorial behavior. Jealousy repels. Groundedness attracts. Mistake 6. Rushing intimacy. This might look like escalating physically before emotional comfort has been established, pushing for deeper conversations too early, forcing vulnerability before trust has been built. The underlying belief is that if you can accelerate intimacy, you can secure her attachment before she has time to reconsider. But intimacy forced is intimacy fragile, because it's built on urgency rather than resonance. Here's the psychology. Women, especially those drawn to older men, value pacing. They want to feel that intimacy is unfolding naturally, not being engineered. When you rush, it signals anxiety. It tells her that you're trying to lock her in before she has time to evaluate whether this is what she actually wants. And that pressure, however subtle, creates resistance. A realistic example: you've been dating for a few weeks, the connection is developing naturally, but you start pushing for physical escalation before she's signaled readiness, or you start sharing deeply personal things in ways that feel more like bonding tactics than genuine disclosure. She feels the rush, and instead of drawing closer, she pulls back. The corrective is patience. Let intimacy develop at its own pace. Respond to her cues rather than imposing your timeline. Trust that if the connection is real, it doesn't need to be rushed, because attraction built slowly is attraction that lasts. Mistake 7. Losing your center around her. Now we come to the 7th and most important mistake: losing your center when you're around her. This is the mistake that undermines everything else. It's when a man who was previously grounded, self-directed, and internally stable begins to orient his entire life around her approval. He changes his routines to accommodate her schedule. He abandons hobbies or friendships that don't include her. He starts monitoring her mood and adjusting his behavior accordingly. He makes her happiness his primary responsibility. And while this might feel like devotion, it's actually abandonment. Not of her, but of himself. Here's the psychology. Attraction is built on polarity. On the sense that two people are coming together from positions of wholeness rather than need. When a man loses his center, when he starts living reactively instead of intentionally, that polarity collapses. Because now, instead of being a grounded presence she can lean into, he's become an extension of her. And there's no attraction in merging. Attraction requires separation. It requires two distinct identities choosing connection. A realistic scenario. When you met her, you had clear routines. You worked out regularly. You had projects. You spent time with friends. You had a life that was full and intentional. But after a few months together, all of that starts to fade. You skip the gym to be available when she texts. You decline invitations from friends because you'd rather spend time with her. You stop working on the things that gave you purpose because your focus has shifted entirely to maintaining her interest. She notices, and instead of feeling valued, she feels burdened. Because now she's responsible for your emotional stability, and that responsibility kills attraction. The corrective is to maintain your center, keep your routines, pursue your interests, spend time with your friends, show up for her from a place of fullness rather than need. Because a woman doesn't want to be your entire world. She wants to be part of a world you've already built. And when you maintain that world, when you stay grounded in who you are regardless of her presence, you give her something she can't find anywhere else. A man who doesn't need her to complete him, but chooses her anyway. That choice, rooted in sovereignty rather than dependency, is what sustains attraction. These 7 mistakes share a common thread. They all signal instability. Whether it's overcompensation, reactivity, or self-abandonment, each behavior communicates that you're not fully grounded in your own value. And instability, regardless of how it manifests, erodes attraction. But here's the good news. Stability can be rebuilt. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent. About showing up with presence rather than performance. About trusting your value enough to stop trying to prove it. Mature attraction is not built on what you do for her. It's built on who you are when nothing is being asked of you. On the quiet confidence that comes from knowing yourself well enough that external validation is no longer necessary. That's the shift. From proving to being. From performing to embodying. And when you make that shift, age becomes irrelevant. Because you're no longer competing with youth. You're offering something entirely different. Something deeper, something that can't be replicated by novelty or intensity. You're offering presence, and presence, at any age, is magnetic. Let me bring this back to the beginning. Attraction erodes when the qualities that initially drew her to you, steadiness, self-possession, grounded masculinity, are quietly replaced by behaviors that signal the opposite. But it doesn't have to. Because every one of these mistakes can be corrected, not through tactics or performance, but through the decision to stop abandoning yourself in favor of securing her approval. You don't compete with youth. You don't try to be something you're not. You don't overcompensate or over-explain or lose yourself in the relationship. You simply stay grounded. You maintain your center. You show up with calm confidence, not because you're trying to impress her, but because that's who you've become. And when you do that, when you embody presence rather than perform it, you offer something that younger men still figuring themselves out simply cannot. Not superiority, just depth. And depth, once recognized, is unforgettable. So trust your value. Stop questioning it. Stop apologizing for it. And start living from it. Because the moment you stop trying to prove you're enough, you become undeniable. Which of these behaviors have you seen play out? either in yourself or in others. Comment below. I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. And if you value clarity over noise, subscribe to Femme Psychology with Emma. I'll see you in the next one.